In a small convent, a voice could be heard from outside. A nun stepped out to see what the matter was and was met by a young girl who pleaded to be allowed to live there. 3 weeks earlier, Stella, the eldest daughter of Marquis Marble, prepared for her tea session with Lord Alfred. It had been 10 years since their engagement, and since Stella turned 17, she had been meeting him twice a month. All Stella could think about was the wedding. She remembered excitedly showing her fiancé dress ideas she had found, only to be met with indifference. Stella thought about commissioning a tailored dress, but as she reflected on it, it seemed Alfred liked a particular style. She raised her hand to knock at the door of the room where they usually met, only to hear something strange. It was her sister's voice. Her sister Fiona was a year younger, the daughter of Stella's father and his second wife. Hearing her voice filled Stella with unease, as today was supposed to be her meeting with her fiancé. Fiona was always beautiful, like an angel. Anything she wore suited her perfectly, and there was no doubt their father and his wife adored her. Stella heard Fiona's excited voice asking Alfred if a dress suited her. Fiona mentioned how she sometimes wished to wear elegant dresses like her older sister, though people often told her it was still too soon. Alfred told her it was normal, though he knew her parents always bought her new dresses anyway. He laughed and asked if she was their doll to dress up. Then he offered to gift her a dress himself. Before Fiona could answer, Stella stepped inside. She had heard enough, and what she saw was worse than she could imagine. Her sister's hands holding her fiancé's. They both looked startled. Fiona mumbled that she had fallen and Alfred helped her up. Alfred, however, showed no concern for Stella's tears. In the same cold, firm tone as always, he told her to stop. He insisted that paying such close attention to trivial matters was unbefitting of a lady. He confirmed Fiona had fallen, then scolded Stella for not showing concern for her sister instead. His harsh words continued, accusing Stella of always blaming him whenever Fiona was involved. Fiona apologized, but Alfred only apologized to her. He then kindly escorted Fiona to the door, leaving Stella behind. Watching them together, they looked like true lovers. Was Stella's only role to create a pleasant setting for them? Stella wanted to run away. She turned to Alfred and told him he had never been this cruel before. But Alfred, sitting sullenly across the table, remained apathetic. Then he snapped. He called her a troublesome woman and demanded she put herself in his shoes. How could something so trivial anger her so much? He bellowed that their future did not look promising and told her she should be grateful he still intended to marry her despite her having no skill. Stella lowered her eyes. Now she knew how he truly felt. Fiona possessed the skill of healing, and perhaps that was why Alfred was drawn to her. A skill was a divine gift awakened through a religious ritual at the temple when noble children turned 7. The purpose of the ritual was to find the saint. This world was plagued by tainted air or miasma caused by human activity. It poisoned the land and water and sometimes gave birth to magical beasts. The one who possessed the skill of purification was the saint, while women with abilities such as healing or barrier creation were considered quasi-saints. Fiona had become a quasi-saint thanks to her healing skill, yet for some reason Stella had not even been allowed to participate in the ritual. She looked up at Alfred and told him calmly that he had been harboring resentment in his heart all along. She apologized to him. Alfred slammed down his teacup and stood. He said there was no need for farewells. Stella stood as well, ready to chase after him, but he repeated that there was no need. She was left alone with no answers. Outside, Alfred joined none other than Fiona. Despite the pain in her chest, Stella could see them strolling the grounds together, smiling and laughing. She, on the other hand, was left with no one. Looking into her mirror, she wondered why no one loved her. Was it because her parents' marriage had been political? Nearly everything she owned was a hand-me-down from her late mother. Her tutor had been private, her maid had left, and her pale, gloomy face stared back at her. Maybe it was only natural that no one loved her. Her maid called for her, saying the master wanted to see her. Stella rose and went to her father. He was far from impressed. He scolded her for leaving Alfred and Fiona alone to stroll in the garden, accusing her of refusing to host them. Before she could respond, he shouted that it was her fault because she didn't know how to win Alfred's heart. He went on to say that if Fiona's reputation were sullied, Stella would bear the blame. Despite his cruelty, Stella found herself apologizing. Her father told her she had empty pride and rebellious eyes just like her mother. Stella remembered her mother. Strict, yes, but also kind. She knew her father did not understand the truth about her, and in Stella he saw the reflection of his resentment. A knock at the door interrupted them. Fiona entered, smiling at her father and saying she came to play. Though he scolded her for entering uninvited, his tone softened immediately as he offered to show her his ship in a bottle. He smiled warmly at Fiona, but scowled at Stella and dismissed her. That night, wrapped up in bed, Stella thought about how political marriages were common among nobles. But the result was children like her, unloved. Even her father showed tenderness only to Fiona. Then she must be the cause of his unhappiness, she thought. Sitting in her vanity, she told herself that if things continued this way, no one would ever be happy. She made her way to the drawing room to find Alfred. His face dropped the moment he saw her. Stella respectfully apologized for intruding, but firmly told him there was something she wished to discuss. She told him she wanted to break off their engagement. At the convent, the young girl, now revealed to be Stella, sat down and sipped tea with the nun who had let her in. She explained everything, and the nun listened patiently. When asked if she had no place in her family's household, Stella admitted it was true. The nun was saddened to hear that, but reassured her that she could stay at the convent, though she would be expected to work. Stella agreed gladly, saying she was happy to do so in exchange for guidance and shelter. The nun asked whether she could rely on her mother's family, but Stella explained that she could not. They lived in another land, and their ties were weak. Understanding this, the nun guided Stella to her room. The convent was bright and airy, offering Stella a sense of relief she hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time, she had hoped that things might turn out all right. Alfred, however, did not take Stella's words well. When she suggested breaking off their engagement, he reminded her that the betrothal was a contract between their families and could not be annulled so easily. He asked her what she planned to do. After all, who would want to marry a girl without a single skill? Stella replied with confidence. She would leave the house and carve out her own happiness with determination. What she did next would be none of his concern. Alfred growled that it would never be none of his concern. But before he could continue, a knock came at the door. It was Fiona. She entered and curtsied, saying she had come to pay her respects. Stella smiled, telling her sister she had arrived at the perfect time. Alfred protested that he and Stella were in the middle of an important discussion, but Stella ignored him. She told Fiona to receive Lord Alfred on her behalf and began walking out. Alfred ordered her to wait, but Stella's mind was made up. She closed the door firmly behind her. From that moment on, she walked away fast. The first thing she did was cut her hair, selling it for money to fund her journey. She put on an old maid's outfit she had once picked up, using it as a disguise. Leaving a written message behind, she secretly departed the mansion. As she traveled, she thought of her mother's words, "If you ever find yourself facing the unbearable, go to the convent." So that was exactly what she did. The nun showed her to her room, a modest chamber with a plain bed and a desk. The nun smiled, remarking that it must be quite a change from what Stella was used to. But this was the life of the convent. Stella assured her that everything was more than enough, thanking her warmly. Sitting on her bed, Stella opened a small box and brought out a string of pearls. She handed it to the nun as a token of gratitude, explaining it had been left to her by her mother. The nun examined it and noticed an emblem engraved on the clasp. She began to read it aloud, but Stella confessed she knew little of her family's history. The nun returned the necklace, insisting Stella keep it. It was enough that she worked and served at the convent. Then she told Stella to change out of her ragged clothes into new ragged clothes, teasing her to smile more often, since she looked lovely when she did. After Stella changed, she was instructed to return downstairs so the nun could teach her the rules of convent life. Stella glanced out of the window before heading down. For the first time, she saw the village from this new perspective, and when she lay briefly on her bed, she felt a refreshing sense of relief. Her first task was cleaning. The nun explained that she would dust the higher places, which often grew dirty. Stella climbed a ladder, covering her mouth, and got to work. She found herself grateful for something meaningful to do. Soon, the hallway gleamed brighter than she had ever seen. To her surprise, Stella actually enjoyed the work. The nun was stunned when she saw the result. The hall looked cleaner than when it had first been built. Stella sheepishly said she had only cleaned a little, but the nun told her it was on another level, as if the atmosphere itself had become pure, like the light of dawn. Stella wondered if this was what dawn truly felt like. The nun asked if Stella had a skill, given her noble birth. Stella admitted she hadn't undergone her ceremony yet, though her half-sister possessed a healing gift. The nun asked about her sister, and Stella explained briefly. Then the nun led her to her next task, cooking. In the kitchen, Stella worked alongside the other kind nuns, chopping potatoes and boiling vegetables. Though she wasn't skilled at it, they appreciated her effort. When they sat down to eat, Stella smiled more than she had in years. Days passed, and Stella settled into convent life. She tended the garden, cleaned, cooked, and shared tea with the others. At first, she feared her father might drag her back, but her fears proved unnecessary. She grew comfortable, even happy. One day, Sister Mary, the elder nun who had taken her in, called Stella aside. She mentioned a position as a maid in the royal palace, perhaps even as a lady-in-waiting. Either role, she explained, would not be so different from Stella's duties at the convent. Mary assured her she would handle Stella's family matters so Stella could focus on her future. Stella smiled and promised to take on the duty with all her heart. Mary clasped her hands warmly. Soon after, Stella departed for the royal palace. She was shown around and given a new uniform, a fine maid's outfit. Her colleague explained that she would be entrusted with the care of the royal Prince Cecil. Cecil, the first prince. Her colleague told her that His Highness lived alone in a tower apart from the palace. As they walked toward it, Stella felt the miasma in the air. It grew heavier with each step. She learned that the previous caretaker, an acquaintance of Sister Mary, had succumbed to the miasma and fallen ill. Alarmed, Stella asked if the tower was dangerous. How could the royal palace itself be so steeped in corruption? Perhaps it was because the palace was the crucible of the nation's wealth, emotions, and power. But what if the miasma was being drawn there deliberately? And with a prince confined in such a place, what kind of life could he live? From the top of the tower, the prince watched Stella arrive. He wondered how long she would last. Inside, the tower was dark and dingy. A single heavy door led to the prince's chambers. All Stella could think about was how oppressive the aura felt in this place. Was it really okay for anyone to live here? The head maid, however, remained calm and unsurprised. She glanced back at Stella and asked if she was all right. Then she reassured her, although the tower was indeed frightening, it would be fine as long as they didn't linger. With that, she walked briskly ahead, forcing Stella to hurry to keep up. The darkness thickened into a smog so dense that it was hard to breathe. Was this really normal? Stella couldn't even see the prince, but she heard the head maid addressing him, explaining that a new maid had been recruited for his care. Stella stepped forward quickly, bowing toward the silhouette in the shadows, and announced that it was an honor to serve him, even if she could not yet see him at all. The maid told Stella that the room behind the door was the waiting chamber, where she was to remain ready. If she began to feel unwell, she must speak up immediately, otherwise another maid would be arranged. With a smile, the maid left Stella alone. Stella's eyes slowly adjusted, though the poisonous aura was thick enough to feel like a magic beast might spawn from it. She called out, asking the prince if she should open a window. A faint yes came from the shadows, startling her. He really was there. Stella threw open the window, only to nearly be swept off her feet by the powerful wind. Of course, they were at the top of the tower. The prince asked if her name was Stella, and she smiled in confirmation. But then he casually remarked that her skirt had flown up. Flustered, Stella pulled it down and asked if he had seen anything. The prince assured her that he had not, but then admitted that he had seen her stockings and garter. Mortified, Stella quickly said she would place her luggage in the waiting room. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the prince reading a book. How could he see in such oppressive darkness? Deciding the first thing to do was clean, Stella gathered her things and headed to the stairwell. She swept and mopped, though exhaustion quickly caught up with her. The prince's voice called out, asking if she was all right. Stella told him she was fine and asked if it would be acceptable to start with his chambers. The prince thanked her. Given that he was under house arrest, Stella had expected someone sullen and difficult. Instead, the prince was surprisingly normal. Despite being wronged and forced to live in such conditions, he was calm, even kind. Stella found that remarkable. Just as she had done at the convent, she cleaned from top to bottom. Bit by bit, the atmosphere began to lighten. The room grew clearer, brighter, almost peaceful. She felt the prince's presence nearby, though he remained obscured until at last the chamber itself seemed white and pure. The prince asked if she felt tired or faint from the miasma, but Stella answered honestly. She was fine, though the visibility was poor. The prince was astonished. Most maids, he explained, could not even remain in the waiting room without collapsing. Stella admitted she was fortunate in that regard and pressed on with her work. She then asked how he was feeling. The prince admitted he could barely stand. Stella's heart sank. His health would never improve in such conditions, but she quietly vowed to continue keeping the place clean for his sake. Hours later, Stella finally finished. She smiled, calling to the prince. He was now visible, seated on the couch, long, shaggy hair covering most of his face. He thanked her warmly, saying it was the first time anyone had ever made his chambers so clean. Stella returned his gratitude with a smile. Her eyes drifted to his hair. It was so long it had to be a burden. Hesitantly, she asked if he would like her to cut it for him. The prince tilted his head, asking if she could do it herself. Stella admitted it was only a thought, realizing she may have spoken out of turn. Standing behind a royal with a blade in hand was not exactly proper. But to her surprise, the prince was open to the idea, admitting his hair was troublesome. Unfortunately, he had no scissors. Stella would need to ask the head maid for them. When Stella approached the maid headquarters, she was immediately questioned about the request. She explained what the prince had said, and after confirming he had indeed permitted it, they handed her the scissors. One of the maids joked that it was fine as long as Stella wasn't a spy, and if she was, then it was up to the prince to deal with her. Stella couldn't help but wonder just how strong the prince was, given the strange remark. When she returned to the tower, the prince had already set out a chair and a towel waiting for her. He sat with almost boyish excitement. Stella was touched that he had prepared himself so willingly. He asked if she had ever cut hair before. Stella laughed nervously. She had only cut her own. The prince looked back at her properly for the first time. Stella was caught by his striking blue eyes like sapphires. She admitted that since his hair was tied up, she couldn't quite see it properly. He agreed to leave it to her, so she began. but her eagerness got the better of her, and she snipped off more than she intended. The prince quickly protested, asking her to keep it at a proper length, not too long, not too short. Stella promised to be careful and firmly asked him to let her concentrate. He was far too bold with his teasing. She worked slowly, carefully until strands of soft silky hair fell away, revealing fair white skin, a proud nose, and those mesmerizing eyes. By the time she was done, he looked like a new person. Though not flawless, the trim was respectable. Stella held up a mirror and the prince was stunned. He hardly recognized himself. "So I'm actually handsome?" he asked. Stella smiled and agreed his hair looked very nice, but she couldn't help asking why he had let it grow so wild. He shrugged, saying there was no particular reason. He had simply put it off again and again until years had passed. Stella thought bitterly to herself that no one must have been paying attention to him. Even her own family, as neglectful as they were, had been in better shape than this. She asked softly how he could endure such a life. The prince assumed she meant his isolation and answered that he did not find it unpleasant. To immerse himself in books and his own pursuits, to sleep and wake whenever he wished. Was this not the ideal life? But Stella pressed further. What about his health? Wasn't it harmful to live in a dark room saturated with poisonous aura? The prince looked genuinely puzzled. Dark? He asked. Stella explained that the miasma was so thick visibility was almost non-existent. The prince admitted he could only feel a faint prickling against his skin, nothing more. Settling back into his couch with his book, he remarked that her movements and manners resembled those of a noblewoman. Stella froze. He had noticed. He asked her what her skill was. To see miasma so clearly was a rare gift. Was she perhaps a half-saint? But Stella had already sunk into her thoughts, memories flashing before her eyes. "I don't have any skill," she whispered sadly. The prince was shocked to hear that Stella had no skill. In fact, he could not believe it. Stella sighed, telling him it was true. The prince looked at her and told her she looked like a saint. But Stella reminded him that looks did not really have much to do with it. The prince told her he was not kidding, that her appearance really resembled the former saint a little. He asked Stella if she had seen her in his great hall. Stella told him she had not, but the prince assumed she must have attended a ball at the palace as a noble's daughter. Stella looked down, telling the prince she never had the chance. The prince told her he understood before mentioning an illegitimate child. Why else would a perfectly healthy young girl be hidden from the public? Stella tried not to be disgraced by his words. She told the prince that she was born and raised in that house, so how was she considered the illegitimate child and not Fiona? She looked down, glum, but the prince smiled, patting the seat next to him. Stella took a seat on his couch and he asked her if she had never been to the temple. Regardless of the result, the ritual should always be done. Stella explained that they said it was not worth the try, that she would not have any useful skills anyway. She admitted that she thought that about herself too. The prince looked her in the eyes, saddened by her story. He asked her if she was afraid of her father. Just hearing his name made Stella tighten her fists into balls. She told the prince she was. A child, especially a girl, could never defy her father. She remembered herself as a little girl and all the fear she had. The prince wondered what the Marquis could have been thinking. He made sure the stepdaughter went through the ritual. The prince thought to himself and had an idea he did not want to believe. He turned to Stella, who was now in tears. Stella was appreciative of the prince's understanding nature, despite him having it harder than her growing up. And still, he understood her. Just that alone made her feel so grateful. The prince smiled, asking if his good looks made her cry. He teased her for falling for him. Stella firmly told him she had not. The prince realized he had forgotten his question, but it was fine because painful pasts can stay forgotten. He told her he just wanted to live happily with the people he would meet from here on. Stella told him that was true, but she was sure he would remember his question eventually. Her tears were dry now and she had a smile on her face again. Stella offered to go and fetch dinner for them. She carefully made her way down the stairs, realizing how tiring it was going up and down. She wished there was a slide for going down at least. When she returned with a lovely platter of food, the prince asked Stella to join him for dinner. Stella hesitated at first, telling the prince she was a maid after all, but he told her not to worry about that with him. Stella understood why he wanted her there. Eating alone was quite lonely after all, so Stella sorted a portion for the prince and one for herself. Prince Cecil smiled and told her to enjoy the food. Their chef was top tier and he knew how hard she had worked all day. They sat down at the candlelit table and began. The prince mentioned how good the food tasted now that the room was clean and beautiful. He thanked Stella sincerely. He noticed how refined and pleasant Stella's table manners were, more evidence that she came from a distinguished background. Stella thanked him for the compliments before calling cheers to his face. Stella could not help but chuckle, wondering if the prince was drunk. She curiously asked how old he was, and he answered 19. Cecil asked how old Stella was, to which she responded 17. Cecil smiled, telling her she was the same age as his younger brother. Stella thought about who his brother must be, but she knew he would be the third prince, heir to the throne. Stella looked at the prince, who was charming and kind. He did not seem like the type unfit to inherit the throne, so why was he treated like a prisoner in the tower? And what was the truth behind it? Stella decided just to go ahead and ask him. The prince casually responded that it was because of his skill. Your skill, Stella repeated. The prince told her he was told it would make him unfit to rule because it was destruction. Destruction of what? Stella asked curiously. The prince darkly responded that he could destroy anything. He held his glass, which transformed to dust. Stella was shocked to see his power. She asked him if he could destroy living things too, and he told her he could. Stella tried not to look afraid, but could not help but wonder if he had ever done it before. Cecil shrugged, telling her it made sense why they thought he would be unfit with such a dangerous skill. From today alone, Stella knew that Cecil did not abuse his power, but convincing the world would be another matter. Even if they understood, they would still fear him. She told him that he could at least live like royalty, but the prince did not take too well to the suggestion. He told Stella that this skill attracted bad things, which was why he should be in the tower. Stella asked if he knew why the miasma was so thick around here, and Cecil told her it was because of his skill attracting bad things. It added up. His naps, his games, the way his father locked him away so he would not be a bad influence on his brothers. All of that was because of this skill. But Stella told him that a lot of that was self-inflicted, so he should not blame everything on his skill. Was he already consumed by the miasma? Cecil brought up their conversation from earlier about Stella and her sister, how her family planned to marry her off to a second son from a lesser house. Cecil thought that was because Stella was the rightful heir of the House of Marble. Of course, it was only his speculation, but they meant to switch her places. He told her that the stepmother was not of noble birth, so to make her daughter the true heir, they kept Stella hidden, and they even had her take the skill ritual instead of her. The prince asked her if she thought that explained it. But could someone else even take the skill ritual in another person's place? Cecil told her that if they wanted to, they could. A 7-year-old does whatever the adults say, and her mother was already bedridden with illness, unable to stop them. Stella looked down, now understanding everything. Cecil continued to ask how they fooled the temple, her mother's relatives, and the servants too. Stella explained that she only met her mother's relatives when she was very young, and just before her sister arrived, all the servants were replaced. Cecil was stunned to hear this. How severe could this family be? He told Stella it was quite difficult to replace household staff, but Stella explained that some of her father's closest servants remained, and her mother's family suddenly stopped writing to her. Stella came to think that her mother's funeral was strangely simple, and her family tried to conceal her death. Was this so her stepmother could take her place? Maybe Stella was overthinking it, but the thoughts could not stop her from gripping the tablecloth. Cecil took her hand, telling her he would help her investigate. He proposed that they go on a date tomorrow, which made Stella freak out inside. Cecil took Stella to the #1 date spot, the temple. Stella looked at the grand building, surprised that Cecil was still calling it a date. She was even a little annoyed, but there was something the prince wanted to test here as he yawned dramatically. He asked if Stella had slept much last night, and she replied the same as usual. The prince smiled, thanking her for everything she had done. It made him feel much lighter. Last night after dinner, Stella had brought warm water for the prince to wash himself. The prince thanked her, but admitted he needed some help. Stella gulped and told him to turn his back. To her surprise, when she dipped the sponge into the water, it was super hot. Cecil told her it was due to his skill that destroying water made it hot. Stella did not understand. Destroying water? She repeated in confusion. Cecil admitted he did not understand it either, but what he did know was that any skill is about how you use it. Stella began to wash the prince's back and noticed how lanky he was. He was broad, however. She snapped back to reality, reminding herself she needed to focus. It was then that the prince held his hands up, feeling an odd sensation. He felt lighter, as though the miasma had been scrubbed out of him. He asked Stella if she had cleaned him, and she smiled awkwardly. But the prince was amazed at what had just happened. He turned to Stella and told her he was looking forward to tomorrow's date. He was convinced they would uncover the truth about the ritual. Stella smiled, hoping so as well. She could not deal with her father's schemes alone, so having Cecil there to help her was a relief. Despite them having just met, the prince had already done a lot for her. Stella turned to him and quietly thanked him for her own sake. The prince jokingly asked if Stella had fallen for him, but of course she said no. She imagined how lonely his life must have been. She told the prince that when he does fall in love someday, he should confide in her, and she would be happy to help him. She even suggested delivering secret letters if he wanted. The prince began to giggle awkwardly, and Stella asked what was wrong. He bluntly replied, "Nothing." Stella instructed the prince to lie down so she could wash his hair. He did as he was told while Stella carefully took care of him. In no time he was ready, and Stella smiled, telling him to keep his eyes closed. The prince told her she was doing a good job and that it felt amazing, his mind much clearer now. Stella smiled, noticing he had been staring at her the whole time. She was glad he was feeling better. Cecil told her he would handle the rest and that she could feel free to use the water. He offered to help her wash too, but of course Stella declined, flustered. That night, Stella slept in her bed completely exhausted. She woke up early, realizing it was still dark. She wandered into the hallway, and to her surprise, the miasma was back. She pulled out her duster and started swiping at it, seeing some improvement. She finished by opening the window, nearly being blown away again. The miasma cleared up, but Stella could not help watching over Cecil, who was sleeping. He looked like he was in pain, sweating and stirring in his sleep. She felt his forehead, which was stone cold. The prince woke up, and Stella apologized for going into his room but explained that he looked troubled. The prince admitted he thought he had a nightmare, but then a gorilla appeared and chased it off with a funny dance. Stella was happy to hear he was fine. She began to walk away, but Cecil asked if she could stay a little longer. Stella accepted, joking that she would protect him like the gorilla did. Cecil smiled and asked if she could hold his hand. Stella was hesitant at first, but she knew the prince must be starved of human warmth, not to mention his room was cold by now. Stella told him that the window was open, and they walked over to it together to see the sunrise, which looked spectacular from their view in the tower. Stella told him she would close the window, reaching out her hand, but Cecil gently took hold of it, asking her to leave it open just a little longer. He wanted to feel the breeze. So they stood together, gazing out of the window hand in hand. Stella could not help but admire the prince. When he was silent, he really did look like someone out of a fairy tale. The next day, Cecil arranged for a carriage to take them to the temple, but it turned out to be much closer than they thought. He complained he was tired, especially after walking down all of those stairs in the tower. Stella told him how she wished there would be a slide, and Cecil agreed. They made their way inside the temple and were met by the priest, who greeted the prince with a smile. He asked what brought him there today, and the prince eagerly told him they needed answers about the ritual 10 years ago. He requested someone who knew the truth, and the priest agreed, bolting off like a rabbit. Stella realized people were quite intimidated by the prince, probably due to his skill. They sat with an elderly man who was elusive but able to provide answers. The prince spoke to him, but the man was very quiet. The prince asked him to speak louder, and the man said he did remember the events of that day. The prince asked if he could recall the ritual for Lady Stella Marble. The man told them that Stella was unusual, so she left an impression. But the prince wanted more information. The man began a long-winded story of every individual detail, shouting at the top of his voice. Cecil smiled awkwardly, asking him to fast forward to the part where Lady Stella appeared, and he could lower his voice too. The man said that Lady Stella kept glancing around, clearly uneasy. She was surrounded by nobles, and something stood out to him. Cecil asked if there was anything else, and the old man remembered blonde hair. He went on to say that the Marquis muttered, "I knew choosing this one was the right choice," when the crystal lit up with the word healing. Cecil thought the story was strange. He thanked the man and apologized for interrupting him. He told Stella that his suspicions were correct. The Marquis had made Stella's sister undergo the ritual in Stella's place. He assumed the priests would never notice since they never attended society events. Stella looked down, telling Cecil she still could not believe it. She could not believe her father would do such an evil thing. Cecil told her that when people lose themselves, jealousy is often at the root. But what was her father jealous of? They knew there was no point dwelling on it and needed to think about what came next. Stella thanked him for the opportunity today, but the prince knew this was where the real work would begin. Some time passed, and Prince Cecil paid a visit to the high priest, who was thrilled to see him. The priest told Cecil how much he had grown, but Cecil replied that not much had changed. He asked the priest if he could show them the ritual chamber. Sadly, the priest explained that outside of ceremonies, no one was allowed inside. Cecil asked if even cleaners were forbidden. The priest mentioned that the chamber had already been cleaned. Cecil then told him that Stella was a master of cleaning, leaving no speck of dust behind in any place she touched. Stella smiled, and the priest quickly changed his mind. So Stella took care of the chamber while the priest explained that he could not stand places like this being dusty. She began with the pillars, cleaning them as thoroughly as she could. The priest turned to Cecil, saying how much of a relief it was to have Stella there. But Cecil told him it was too soon to thank her, giving the priest a mysterious smile. Stella paused for a moment, thinking she had heard something. The priest approached from behind, praising her as a true master of cleaning. The floor she polished gleamed so brightly that it looked as though it had been reborn. Then it clicked for the priest. Stella had the power of purification. Stella was completely bewildered. She told the priest that her skill could never be as great as that of a saint, and she had never even received a revelation. Cecil explained that Stella's family background was complicated. Another daughter had taken Stella's name and received the revelation, while Stella herself was treated as if she had no skill. "But now her talent is obvious, isn't it?" Cecil said. The priest was impressed. Looking closely, he realized Stella's face did resemble the former saint. Cecil agreed, adding that Stella's mother came from the same country, and he theorized that they could be related. Cecil did not hesitate to ask Stella to touch the crystal, but the priest reminded them that using it outside of a ritual was forbidden. Then with a smile, he agreed to allow it. He would be the witness alongside the prince. Stella's head began to spin. She knew she was not ready, but Cecil pulled her toward the altar. He smiled, telling her she had already had 10 years to prepare. Stella questioned if her skill was useless, but Cecil reassured her that even if it was, it would be fine. The priest also tried to encourage her. They guided her to the crystal and Stella stepped forward to face it. It was the crystal of skills. 10 years ago, she had never come here, and everything since then weighed on her mind. She wondered if Sister Mary had known this would happen. When she turned, Cecil and the priest were smiling supportively. So Stella reached out both hands and the crystal lit up immediately. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Fiona sat for her painter. To her shock, the painter addressed her as Stella when he asked for her feedback. Fiona told him to make her skin fairer, her eyes larger, and her nose higher, since the portrait would serve as part of a marriage proposal. Soon a maid entered to announce Lord Alfred's arrival. Fiona quickly ordered her to say she was not there. The painter chuckled, asking if that was wise, but Fiona muttered that Alfred had come to speak about her sister. Growing irritated, she told the painter she was getting bored of him, but the painter asked if Lady Stella shared her name with her older sister, and then questioned who Fiona was. Realizing she had made a mistake, Fiona hurried to call for her mother to fix it. Her mother told Fiona in private that she needed to get used to using her given name. She then explained to the painter that Fiona was only her childhood name, while Stella was a treasured name in the House of Marble. Many daughters were given the name Stella. She added that an awful curse would fall upon anyone who revealed a person's childhood name, consuming them with miasma. Because of that, Fiona's true name had to remain secret. Later, Fiona's father called her to discuss Alfred. He said he had heard she turned Alfred away. Fiona asked if she had been wrong. Her father assured her she had not, since Alfred was not her fiancé. He promised to handle the matter himself and told Fiona to focus on her portrait, since her future husband would see it. Fiona looked down, thinking about how soon she would marry someone she did not love. Despite the beautiful dresses, attention, and glamour, traditions could still feel like suffering. Back in the chamber, Cecil was captivated by how bright the crystal's light had become. The priest agreed, telling Stella he had never seen anything like it. Inspecting the crystal, he declared that Stella's skill was purification. He knelt before her, calling her a saint. Stella blushed, asking him to rise, but the priest insisted that only she could banish the miasma. Though her power was still weak, he said, one day she would be able to cleanse an entire nation. Cecil explained that Stella might not realize how deadly miasma truly was, since she had lived with it for so long. In reality, it poisoned both body and mind, killed crops, and created monsters. Miasma never faded on its own, and without a saint, the world was in peril. He told Stella that she was the one the world had been waiting for. Suddenly, they heard a noise outside. It could only be other priests, concerned about why the crystal's power was being used without sanction. The high priest warned them to be careful, especially considering Stella's past. She asked what they should do. Cecil offered to take the blame, suggesting they claim he had touched the crystal by accident and that it had lit up. He reached out to the crystal, and to everyone's surprise, it shone even brighter. No one expected this. Cecil himself was astonished it responded, since he already had a skill. Then another priest entered, demanding to know what was going on and why the light had flared. Cecil feigned ignorance, pretending the crystal had simply lit up when he touched it. Back in the tower, the prince collapsed onto the dining table, overwhelmed by the day. Stella, however, was curious. She asked why the crystal had lit up for him again when he touched it. Cecil explained that his skill had evolved. Stella admitted she had no idea that was even possible. Neither did he, but that was what the crystal had revealed. He told her to watch. Taking a chess piece, he flicked it and turned it to dust, showing his old skill. Then he placed it back on the table, restored perfectly. His new skill was reconstruction. Cecil was overjoyed with his new skill, and Stella told him what he had just done was amazing. He wondered if he could create other shapes as well, holding the chess piece in his hand. To his delight, he successfully transformed it into an apple. Excitement bubbled within him as he thought about all the things he could make. He wanted to try more and level up quickly. Stella asked him about the idea of leveling up. Cecil explained that a symbol appears after the skill name, and it changes as you become more proficient. Stella grew thoughtful. She told the prince that she might actually have 2 skills. Cecil admitted he had noticed her cleaning ability was definitely a skill, though today had been her first official day at the temple. Normally, one cannot gain a skill without touching the crystal. Stella told him she did have something, however. She searched through her belongings and pulled out a crystal pendant, explaining that it had been one of her mother's keepsakes. Cecil asked if it was the same as the crystal in the temple, and Stella said most likely. She suspected her mother had made her touch it without realizing. Cecil told her it was a precious memento meant to watch over her, and he offered to place it around her neck. Stella held her breath as the prince fastened the clasp. She could not turn around, her face flushing scarlet. Back at the marble estate, chaos broke out. Stella's stepmother scolded her father, asking if he was even listening. She demanded that they bring Stella back, though her father insisted that Stella had left of her own will. The stepmother argued that Stella had only run away without thinking things through, and as a noble's daughter she was supposed to live properly in a proper environment. Of course, her true motive was to protect the replacement. Eventually, Stella's father agreed, saying he would send his men to the monastery at once. But Stella could not be found there. Her father sank into his desk, muttering that he would have to investigate further. The stepmother calmly gazed out the window, remarking that breaking an engagement and then running away was a bold move for Stella. She wondered aloud if her husband's former wife had been the true influence behind it all. At this point, there was no way to know. At the tower, Stella tried to recall what she and Cecil had been discussing. Cecil was brainstorming what they should do about her family, whether to punish them or turn a blind eye. Stella admitted she had not yet decided what she wanted, but one thing she was certain about was her desire to learn more about her mother. Did she truly die of illness? Had her death even reached her friends? Stella longed to know the truth. She also understood that what her family had done to her was unforgivable. Cecil asked if she wanted them ruined, but Stella suggested that she could simply go on living as a stranger. Cecil turned to her, suddenly serious. His head lowered as Stella asked him what was wrong. He looked over his shoulder to reveal blotches of miasma, an ominous mass of negative emotions clinging to him. Stella stared at it as though she could hear it speaking to her. She wanted it gone, wanted it to stop tormenting the prince. Suddenly, a burst of light filled the room. Stella smiled. She had eliminated the miasma successfully, but Cecil was none the wiser. Stella apologized, asking if it had hurt. Cecil told her it only felt like she had pressed on a tender spot. Stella stammered, realizing it was true. She really was a saint. Cecil teased that he had seen the ritual with his own eyes, yet now he was suspicious. What saint went straight for a vital point? He chuckled. Stella told him she wanted to thank him properly. Because he had taken her to the temple, she had learned so much about her skills and even about her mother. She was truly grateful. She promised she would always protect Cecil. And now she understood why miasma clung to him. Miasma sought salvation, so it chose him. It believed Cecil could help it. Stella realized that, in a way, she owed her purification power to him, and she could not leave someone so beloved by miasma alone. She wanted to be his strength. Cecil looked her in the eyes and smiled warmly. Before long, he stood ready as ever and told her he was going to report to his father. Stella could only wish him well, though unease stirred within her as she wondered how things would develop from here. She busied herself with cleaning to reset her thoughts, but as she stepped onto the stairwell, she slipped and tumbled down the tower in seconds, landing with a heavy thud. Looking up, she saw the prince further down the stairs. She really thought it might be the end of her. Recovering, Stella drew water from the well, remembering Cecil's suggestion about installing a slide. Carrying the water back up the tower, she realized that even with a slide, they would still need to climb. On another trip to the well, she noticed how many plants around the tower had wilted, likely from the miasma that lingered there. But thanks to her cleaning, the air was noticeably purer and even breezier. Was this what it felt like to bear a saint's power? Stella lowered her gaze, suddenly feeling defeated. Cleaning usually cleared her head and lifted her spirits, but now she felt weighed down. A rustling sound broke her thoughts. She assumed it was a mouse, but the noise grew louder, closer. Something was approaching. Could it be a monster? The rustling grew louder, and Stella instinctively shielded her face as a creature flew out of the bushes. Moments later, she felt something soft in her hands. It was a chubby little bird, round, fluffy, and almost cute. But Stella knew monsters like this were born of miasma. Still, she felt empathy for the creature. It had been shaped by hatred and pain, yet here it was, reaching out to her as if it wanted to be saved. Was it really something she should erase with purification? Voices reached her ears. She turned to see Cecil returning with another gentleman. She welcomed him back, and Cecil introduced her to the man at his side. It was his father. Stella immediately curtsied, but the king gently asked her to be at ease and raise her head. Cecil's attention went straight to her hands. "Is that a monster you found?" he asked. Stella explained that it seemed frightened and on edge, holding out the bird for him to see. But Cecil quickly noticed something else. She was injured, a small cut marking her palm. He frowned, telling her they should take care of it quickly. Bird-type monsters, he explained, could grow troublesome if left unchecked. The king asked if Cecil meant to kill it here. Cecil admitted he did not want to, especially since Stella looked so sad. Just as Cecil prepared to use his power, his father suddenly burst out in protest. He pleaded with his son not to harm the creature. "It hasn't done anything wrong," he insisted. Cecil warned him that if they waited too long it could cause trouble, but the king stubbornly promised to raise it himself even when it grew. With a sigh, Cecil explained to Stella that his father loved cute creatures. Apparently that affection extended to monsters as well. Stella could understand the king's feelings, but she wondered if there was a way to truly save the bird. As Cecil examined it, Stella reached out. A flash of light surrounded her hand and she called for Cecil to be ready with reconstruction. He nodded. The purification spell began to work. Stella felt her body grow heavy, but she pressed on. The little bird was reborn in her arms. "Now!" she cried. Cecil immediately used his skill and the creature transformed completely. Together they had saved it. Cecil was amazed by what they had achieved, and the king was overjoyed, knowing the little creature was safe. They all laughed, gathering to think of names. "Kessarin Passarin?" Cecil suggested. It fit, but it was a mouthful. Stella playfully suggested Keparin Ranchin, which made the king chuckle. He declared they could shorten it to Kepa, or even Renranchin. Stella giggled, and the name stuck. Later, at the tower, the king slumped into a chair exhausted. He turned to Stella and told her he had heard much about her from Cecil. He praised her, saying the clear air around the tower and in this very room was proof she was a saint. He offered to discreetly investigate her family, but until then he asked her to remain hidden and continue staying with Cecil. Meanwhile, Renranchin had stolen the king's heart. He played endlessly with the chick, delighted by how happy it seemed. Cecil observed that in all the texts he had read about saints, monsters were always purified away, never saved. The king suggested that perhaps purification and reconstruction together could create something new, that the two of them might save many more monsters in the future. Renranchin fluttered to Cecil's arms, snuggling close. Stella gasped as she realized the bird was absorbing miasma. Cecil laughed, saying that if the little chicken could purify miasma within its body, it deserved to be called a holy beast. He added that the world could change if miasma could be cured without relying only on a saint. All three agreed to watch over Renranchin together, like some sort of guardian squad. Talk about co-parenting. After fussing over the chick for the rest of the afternoon, the king returned to the palace. As soon as he left, Cecil groaned, wishing his father had acted more normal in front of Stella. But she only smiled and told him she thought the king was wonderful. Cecil then asked Stella to show him her palms. She held them out and he carefully examined the spot where Renranchin had scratched her. When she insisted it was fine, Cecil asked if he could try using reconstruction as a form of healing. Stella blinked in surprise. She had never thought of his power that way. If he could heal, he could save countless people. Cecil hesitated, worried he might hurt her more. But Stella encouraged him, insisting she was happy to be his test subject. He took her hand and in an instant the scar faded. "Did it hurt?" he asked. "A little," she admitted, "but I'm fine now." Cecil looked down, apologizing anyway. She smiled, relieved not only that it healed, but that they had discovered just how versatile his skill could be. Cecil continued experimenting, even refilling an empty bucket with water. Grinning, he told Stella she could skip trips to the well from now on. That evening, Stella cleaned while Cecil read a book. Renranchin bounced around the room, mischievous as ever, until his heart was content. Then Stella noticed something new. The bird could control the wind, zooming around the tower in circles. She laughed, and Cecil looked up, watching her quietly. He joined her in cleaning, grabbing a sponge despite her protests that she could handle it. He looked very pleased with himself after finishing one spot. Stella realized then exactly how Cecil saw her. She laughed, teasing him. If only there were a save state skill, that would come in handy. Cecil had a strange expression. Part of him felt sad, yet another part felt relieved. He smirked. "Next time," he teased, "I'll paint you on a giant canvas." Cecil looked at his father doting on Renranchin and knew this was becoming a problem. Stella asked if it was because of his father's clingy behavior, but Cecil had another concern. He thought Renranchin was growing far too quickly. Only a month had passed, and the bird was already big enough to hold with 2 hands. Cecil told Stella they might need to consider moving the creature outdoors. Before he could press further, his father suddenly grew serious. He told them there was a more important matter to discuss. The king revealed that his people had nearly finished their background investigation into Marquis Marble, and the results aligned with what Cecil had suspected. Cecil asked Stella to pause her chores and sit down, even feeding her a grape to keep her from fussing. The king fed one to Renranchin as well, and it was then Stella noticed her hands were no longer trembling. Cecil brought up Lady Stella's mother first. The king explained that the palace had never received any report that Marquis Marble remarried. That meant Stella's mother was officially still alive. Cecil had suspected as much. From the moment he discovered Stella's stepmother was using her mother's title without a proper farewell to the woman she replaced, the truth had been clear. The stepmother claimed poor health and rarely appeared in public, making the deception impossible to expose. Cecil asked if the daughter showed up in society, The king nodded. She supposedly resembled the Marquis and was introduced as his only daughter. No one questioned it. She even called herself Stella and entered the palace often. The king turned to Stella and asked if it was true she had not attended society since early childhood. Stella nodded, ashamed. The king explained that if people had only seen a child briefly, they would never notice a swap. Cecil asked about the stepmother's background. The king said she had once been a commoner and a dancer. They had investigated possible spy connections but found nothing. More likely, she simply wanted a luxurious life, so she assumed Stella's mother's identity. Whenever the Marquis was away, she caroused in town. The truth came crashing down on Stella, but it did not end there. Cecil asked how the deception had fooled her family. The king explained that Stella's grandfather, the head of her house, was in poor health. Letters were exchanged, but the Marquis kept details vague. By now he was too deeply entrenched in the lie to turn back. The king sighed, stroking Reincarnated. He admitted he did not want to say this in front of Stella, but she deserved to know. On the day of the Eastern market, her mother's carriage was attacked by bandits, and for a short time she was taken captive. When the Marquis discovered this, he was devastated. Former servants testified that he repeatedly doubted his wife's chastity. Darkness filled Stella's heart. If this was how she came into the world, then it made sense to her why no one had ever loved her. Cecil looked at her with deep sadness and asked his father to stop. The king turned to Stella and spoke gently. He said he told her all this because she deserved to know the truth. Whatever her origins, she was precious to them. If she wished, they could use an appraisal skill to confirm her bloodline. It was a major decision, so he encouraged her to think carefully. With that, the king departed the tower, leaving Cecil and Stella alone. All Stella could think about was whether it would have been better for everyone if she had never been born. She was so lost in her thoughts that she did not hear Cecil's voice. She collapsed to the ground, struggling to breathe. Cecil quickly placed something warm and fluffy against her hands and face. "Breathe slowly," he whispered. It was Reincarnated. Stella inhaled his comforting aura and finally relaxed, managing a weak smile. She wondered how his soft little belly could have such soothing powers. She realized then that she was not alone. There were people who were kind to her. Thinking it would have been better never to be born was no way to live. Cecil gently brushed away her tears. She looked into his eyes and saw he was just as sad. He admitted he was worried about her. Stella insisted she was fine, though she looked pale as a ghost and had not even realized she was crying. The next day, Cecil had an announcement. That afternoon, there was to be a tea party for the quasi-saints in the palace gardens. He told Stella they would infiltrate. She looked at him like he was mad. Today? As in, right now? She panicked over her lack of outfit choices. Cecil reassured her. They would only be peeking. If her stepsister was truly a quasi-saint, she would be there, and Cecil wanted to confirm she was calling herself Stella. He told her they could not leave everything to investigators. They needed to approach the truth themselves. Stella knew he was right. Determined, she agreed. The two made their way through the massive garden maze. Cecil told her how he used to play hide-and-seek with his brothers there, driving attendants mad. Finally, they reached the spot where the tea party was being held and peeked through the bushes. There, Stella saw Fiona, sipping tea with several other ladies. One of the women asked the group to begin reporting their activities as quasi-saints. Cecil explained that the woman was the leader, betrothed to Marzelina Benny. A dark-haired woman went first, explaining that she brewed potions and donated them to the knights. She added that miasma had been heavy lately and harvests were poor, but she had managed to level up her skill. The others praised her dedication. Lady Jennifer spoke next, proposing that the council revise the waterworks by year's end. Cecil remarked that her skill seemed useful and explained to Stella that many different abilities existed. Those with practical skills often received special treatment as quasi-saints, along with a rank. But sometimes nothing manifested at all, and even commoners could have remarkable abilities. The system, he noted, was far from fair. Then it was Lady Stella's turn. Fiona's eyes lit up. She confidently told the group that she had been healing her father lately since he had been feeling tired. Silence followed. A woman asked if it was true that Stella's ancestor was a saint, and if so, was that really all she had done? Fiona faltered, beginning to ramble. Suddenly, her teacup slipped, spilling into her lap. The ladies asked if she was hurt. Fiona quickly stood, taking their advice to go change. She wished them a good day and tried to hurry off, but the women reminded her that "excuse me" would have been more proper since she was expected to return. Despite Fiona lying and stealing her name, the real Stella could not help but feel a pang of pity. She sensed Fiona was being bullied among the group. Cecil's voice snapped Stella back to focus. She told him she sensed something ahead, and they followed the pull until they reached a well. Stella knew instantly it was contaminated. Together, they decided to handle it immediately. Cecil moved aside the covering, revealing the water. The energy was so thick Stella had to shield herself. The well had turned miasmic and spawned monsters. Slimes began to rise. Cecil warned her it would not end, that the bodies kept splitting. "Watch out," he shouted as a slime lunged toward her. Stella cast Purification and the slime collapsed, but splattered all over her. She asked why he had stayed perfectly dry. Cecil smirked, explaining he destroyed his target at the molecular level. Stella rolled her eyes but focused on finding a way to purify the well. Then came another distraction. A loud noise from the direction of the tea party. Had they missed a split body? There was more shrieking from the tea party as the ladies were confused by the slime. They cried as it ruined their outfits and covered their toes. Cecil and Stella took cover, but they witnessed the mess that had been caused by lifting the well in the first place. All Stella could think about was Fiona. Cecil told her to give him a second. He would begin by destroying the slimes that weren't on people, while Stella purified the ones stuck to them. That way they could keep her skill discreet and he could draw attention in the open. Stella told him she understood, taking the cloth he handed her. Cecil ran out, telling everyone it was okay while Stella performed her skill from the bush. Talk about taking credit, Cecil. The women looked up, shocked to see the prince who was practically never in the public eye. For some of them, it was the very first time seeing him. They whispered among themselves about how different he seemed from what they expected. As Cecil stood there posing, Stella worked hard, eliminating the monsters and turning them into water. Then something caught her eye. It was Fiona. Prince Cecil was greeted by a woman who thanked him for saving them. He didn't make too much of a fuss and told the women to continue the tea party like nothing had ever happened. Then he disappeared back into the bush to find Stella. He asked her if anyone noticed. Stella didn't think so, but she admitted she had never sensed the main body of the slime. She told him it was likely down in the well. Despite the initial trouble with the well, the duo decided to head back. That was when they saw a giant slime, and they knew immediately it was the one they had been worried about. Thanks to Reincarnated, they knew they could purify the slime and then reconstruct it. Cecil started first, attempting to destroy the area around the stone. Stella held up her hands, but the creature was escaping quickly. She suddenly felt a strange sensation, her body growing cold. They realized the slime had frozen completely, perhaps because destroying the surrounding molecules dropped the temperature. Stella was amazed. Cecil told her that now was her chance to cast Purification, and Stella walked toward the frozen slime, placing her hand on it. The slime popped immediately, and Cecil held out his hand to reconstruct it. The slime lifted into the air, glowing like a flower. Stella smiled, admiring their work, though she shivered from the cold. Cecil apologized with a short laugh, saying he had tried to warm her up but had purified the inner casing too, just in case. As Stella began to walk away, Cecil called her name to apologize again. He admitted that it seemed like a cool idea, but he had only wanted to look cool for her. Stella smiled and told him that he did. Her words made Cecil stumble over his own, then break into a grin as he suddenly had an idea. They looked at the slime, now completely calm and tame, and decided they needed to smuggle it. Stella lifted her skirt and told the slime to hop under. The two made their way to the palace where the king was discussing matters with one of his men. He asked Cecil if everything was all right, then noticed Lady Stella with him. Cecil, keeping it short, asked if they could borrow a bath for Stella. Stella tried not to be offended by the request. The king thought it was perfect timing, then asked where Reincarnated was. Left behind, Cecil answered. Stella whispered to the slime to stay hidden under her skirt. The king said that besides himself and Cecil, there was one more person he wanted Stella to meet. Stella smiled, saying that if the king trusted her, she must be a wonderful person. Deep down, however, Stella was terrified. The king knocked on the door and Stella hid behind Cecil's back. Inside, a beautiful lady sipped tea. She smiled when she saw the king and Cecil, then asked what was going on. "It has been a while, mother," Cecil said. Stella wanted to die. The king explained that Stella was the saint he had mentioned. Stella stepped forward, greeting the queen politely and asking how she was. She introduced herself, but the queen looked just as honored to meet Stella. She asked her to step forward so she could see her face properly. Stella obeyed, and the queen complimented her lovely hair. Stella thanked her, but the queen frowned at her maid's outfit, saying she wanted to get Stella something cuter. She quickly apologized for the dust in the room, and then promised to have a special chamber built for Stella in the tower so she would have a nice place to sleep like Cecil. Stella smiled politely but felt overwhelmed when the queen suddenly asked why she was damp. Cecil asked his mother for a favor. The queen listened, shocked, as he recounted how Stella had handled a monster only for him to freeze her afterward. She told Stella it was good timing since a bath had just been drawn, and invited her to use it. Stella accepted, but when she saw the bathroom, she didn't feel worthy of it at all. It was beautiful, with a grand bath filled with hot, soapy water. She realized it had been ages since she last soaked in one. The queen entered, telling Stella it was one of her favorite spots. Stella praised it, but insisted the queen should bathe first. To Stella's surprise, the queen asked if they could go in together, saying it would be an honor to share a naked heart-to-heart with a saint. She even offered to undress Stella, but Stella declined quickly. The queen fussed anyway, losing track of where she was standing. To make matters worse, the slime crawled out from under Stella's dress, wrapping around the queen's legs. The queen shrieked as she fell. The king and Cecil heard the noise but shrugged it off. The king told Cecil that he had business with him as well. When Cecil asked what, his father replied, "A prospectus, addressed to you." Cecil's eyes lit up. It was his first one. When he opened the book, he saw none other than Stella, with her portrait. Cecil sighed, wondering if they were really that dense. He told his father it was the younger sister, and the king remarked that she might have been at the tea party. Cecil acted none the wiser, but inwardly wondered if he was being targeted. The king told him to expect more proposals from now on, though he would never hand his son over to the House of Marble. It was clear to him that someone had already stolen his son's heart. Cecil flustered, his father teasing him about how his face had lit up when the letter was opened. Cecil insisted he was only flattered and begged him not to tattle to Stella. Meanwhile, in the carriage, Fiona chatted endlessly to the driver, sharing all her business as usual. She told him about how Cecil had swept in and defeated the monster. The driver mentioned that Cecil was the very man her father had proposed a match with, and Fiona instantly knew it was fate. She was convinced she would marry the prince. Stella and the queen eventually took the bath together, and Stella apologized on behalf of the slime. The queen told her it was fine. In fact, she was thankful to have seen something so fascinating. She had never even heard of anyone taming a monster before. The queen looked at Stella and told her that they had actually spoken briefly during her wedding. She recalled how Stella's mother looked so beautiful and radiant, and she said that Stella seemed to be a blend of both her mother and the former saint. Stella was curious to hear more, and the queen continued, saying that although Stella carried her own unique aura, she still resembled the two women physically. She told her, "If your mother were the sun, you would be the moon." Both symbols of beauty. Stella was deeply honored to hear this. She had always thought herself plain compared to her mother. The queen encouraged her to carry herself with more pride, to speak her mind, and to be more assertive. Stella felt called out, but she knew it was true. She was timid, after all. The queen asked her if she had ever felt like disobeying her father, but chose not to out of fear. Stella admitted that she thought it was better to lay low, not wanting to trouble the people who had helped her. The queen looked at her kindly, but with firmness, and told her that such an approach would make sense if she were ordinary. But Stella wasn't ordinary anymore. She explained that Stella's plan to remain quiet might work for now, but eventually she would only be used as a pawn in political games. For example, people might order her to purify certain things but forbid her from purifying others. She could even be passed around solely for the sake of the nation. The queen admitted that if Stella were in her hands, she too would use her power without hesitation, and no one would care about Stella's personality. That was simply the reality of great power. It stopped being for the world and became something only for the nation. Stella saw where the queen was coming from. She was warning her not to let others dictate how her power should be used. The queen told her that of course it was nice to help others, but without boundaries, Stella would be nothing more than a fool. And for someone with such great power, a lack of responsibility could be dangerous. Stella knew it was true. Responsibility was exactly what she had been missing. The queen asked if Stella had anything she wanted to do, not for someone else but for herself. Stella thought hard, struggling for an answer which made the queen smile. She reassured her that she was still young and had only a narrow view of the world. It was natural that her best choice right now would be to help those who had supported her. But now that she was a saint, she would find that the world was much vaster than she ever imagined. Stella felt as though a whole world had opened inside of her after speaking with the queen. Was she being encouraged to step away from political influence and live freely? She asked why the queen was telling her all this. The queen explained that when she was a child, she had read many fairy tales about saints. She had always cherished the idea of people who purified the world's miasma and saved everyone. Her dream was to see a saint with her own eyes one day. She didn't want to betray the little girl she had once been. She wanted to show her a world that was kind, strong, and beautiful, just as she had always believed. Stella realized she wanted the same. The queen added, "If a saint only appeared as a blessing, but acted only when the country ordered them to, wouldn't that be disappointing?" Stella knew the answer. The queen asked if Stella had ever truly seen how the commoners lived. Stella admitted she had only seen a little, mostly around the monastery, which was a relatively neat place. The queen told her that after the social season, there was a place she wanted Stella to visit. It would be a little dangerous, but she would assign Cecil as her guard. Stella hesitated. She couldn't imagine having the prince risk himself to protect her. But the queen reassured her that Cecil would never go outside without an excuse like this, so it would actually be good for him as well. Stella agreed, thanking the queen for the opportunity. The queen smiled warmly, admiring Stella's determination, and then suggested they leave the bath before they ended up cooked. When they were out of the bath and wrapped in robes, Stella thanked the queen again for such a precious experience. She asked if she could clean the bath as repayment. The queen questioned her at first, but eventually agreed, stepping out to give her space. Stella set to work, doing the one thing she knew best. A few moments later, as Stella finished up, She felt a sphere forming on top of her head. It was the slime from earlier. It must have been a water user. Stella couldn't help but wonder if Queen of Monsters might be a more fitting title than Saint. The bathroom sparkled by the time she was done, and the Queen returned, remarking that she was already looking forward to her next bath. She asked Stella to come forward and get changed, promising they would prepare a new maid's uniform for her. The Queen led Stella to a chair where a beautiful dress was laid out. She told her to wear it in the meantime. Stella adored the dress but hesitated, unsure if it would suit her. The Queen lifted it up and told her she would look just like a saint from a fairy tale. Stella walked out into the drawing room, where Cecil and the King were speaking. She apologized for keeping them waiting. When Cecil saw Stella in the dress, he did a double take. Even the King smiled. The Queen explained that it was one of her old dresses, and the King commented that while his wife looked lovely in it, Lady Stella gave it a completely different aura. He asked Cecil if he agreed, and the prince could barely string together a sentence. The royals giggled, watching their son flustered, while Stella wondered if she should step in and rescue him. Desperate to change the subject, she pointed out the miasma building up in the room. Cecil asked where, and Stella indicated a spot near the fireplace. She explained that it was almost like a monster core, something that would keep generating miasma if left unchecked. The Queen was shocked. There was no way something like that could occur naturally. She suspected it had been planted. She asked Stella if she could search the palace while she was here, and Stella wondered if she was already being used. The Queen suggested they begin with Benny's room, and said it would be a good opportunity to introduce Stella to him. Stella knew that by Benny, the Queen meant the Crown Prince, Benedict. The four of them made their way to his chambers, and Stella felt she was already well past her limit for the day. But Cecil steadied her nerves, meeting her eyes and telling her she looked stunning like a goddess. Stella awkwardly thanked him, and soon they reached Benedict's room. Benny came out with a cheerful smile. He looked a little like Cecil, but younger and brighter. Stella curtsied, starting to introduce herself when she saw an unexpected guest. It was Ranran. Cecil quickly explained that the girl was Stella and the bird was Ranran. He greeted his brother warmly, remarking it had been a while since they'd last seen each other. Benny explained that he had brought the bird home from today's hunt, then promptly removed it from the chain. Cecil asked if he really thought Ranran was a hawk, and the Queen joked that it could be big enough to eat in an emergency. Of course, the King didn't like the sound of his precious pet being turned into dinner. Ranran flapped wildly the moment it was released, making the Queen shriek. The Queen called for Dewey, Benny's attendant, to excuse them so she could speak with her son privately. When the room was clear, they all sat down and told Benny the full story about Stella and her skill. Benny looked down, admitting it was a lot to take in, but he understood that Lady Stella was different from the saints of old. He promised to keep an eye on the House of Marble as well. Cecil showed him the monster core, wrapped in a handkerchief, explaining that they had come to his room to check for any others. Benny was grateful. Stella quickly realized that the room was saturated with miasma, and the densest source was the painting hanging on the wall. She could feel it radiating across the entire canvas. The Queen explained that the painting had been in the Crown Prince's chambers for generations. Benny mentioned that he often dreamed of monsters crawling out of it. Cecil wondered if the pigment had been made from ground miasma stones. Stella stepped forward and purified the painting. Benny was amazed to see her skill in person. Cecil praised her proudly, but the Queen playfully asked why he was the one bragging. Benny shrugged, saying that being the Crown Prince would naturally attract malice. He added that there were factions who wanted his brother on the throne, so it could have been their doing. But Cecil replied that since Benny was the hard-working one, he was clearly more suitable. Their mother interjected, warning that those who praised Cecil were usually scoundrels hoping to exploit his power, so he had no choice but to refuse them. The King placed his hand on Benny's shoulder, telling him confidently that he was doing well. Stella could only watch the family in silence. Everything just seemed so complicated.